Hello and welcome. This this poster paper is entitled Augmented Reality of Herbarium Specimens in Biology Education. My name's Thomas McLaughlin and I am in DCU in Ireland, and I happen to be the uh, director of the DCU Herbarium. The herbarium, if those of you who don't remember, is where you have sheets, as you can see here, an example of one, a sheet of dried pressed plant, and they would have been used a lot more in the past in teaching biology in high school and primary school, for children and students to learn about plant structure, plant ecology, parts of the plant, the general biology of a plant, structure of flowers, leaves, types of leaves, and so on. Okay, so they were used to have a lot of information was contained in the sheet, and what the student would have to do would be to try and decode that information and make sense of it and look for patterns between different sheets of different specimens, and also look at the variations at different times of the year between those that were collected at those times in the year. So there's an awful lot of information that was encoded. There was also metadata stored on the sheet. You can see the labels at the bottom. So this would contain the name, the place that they were found, the species name, the generic name, the name of the authority, the name of the collector, the location, sometimes the coordinates, the time of year it was collected on, and so on. Okay, and the thing is that I suppose many people found that these sheets as a mode of learning, um, it seemed to disappear from around the 1960s onwards. Okay, it was considered, if you like, a staple or a central part of teaching biology before that time, and something happened in around the 1960s, and it fell out of use until nowadays. It's an unusual thing for a school, for example, to have a herbarium, and even universities uh, less and less have herbaria, and some even are getting rid of their herbaria, which is unfortunate. Okay, so if we are to try and either reintroduce this as a method for teaching biology, it may be that we have to integrate it with information technology, um, and make some decision as to what the point of such a thing is, because in order to produce these sheets, there's quite a lot of processing that's involved. You've got field work, collection of the plants. There's the ethics associated with that. Then the materials that are used, it's usually cotton rag paper that's that the specimen is stuck to. It has to be pressed in a certain way to make sure it's perfectly flat. It then has to be stuck to the paper, the good quality paper, and then the labels have to be applied in the appropriate fashion. And then of course you have storage, and then in the handling, especially in a school scenario, in the handling, that damage can be done to them very easily, and then they have to be repaired. So there's quite an ongoing amount of maintenance. Okay, and that probably has put many teachers off. But in the days before, I suppose before the 1960s, what happened was, and certainly in the Anglophone world, you had a separation of zoology and botany into two separate subjects, and in the 1960s these came together to form this new subject of biology. And there were, I suppose, cuts in terms of the amount of simply the amount of topics you could cover, and the depth of which they could be covered, and plant anatomy, plant structure, comparative structure of plants was one of the things that seemed to go, and with it the herbarium. So, for example, you can look back on historical texts in teaching biology, and you will inevitably see something about the herbarium. So you'll see it, for example, in historic texts such as Lowson's Botany, which was a favourite high school textbook in the English-speaking world, in Britain and in Ireland and beyond, I'm sure. Um, all the way up to the 1980s, for example. Okay, so what can we do if we are in the possession of such sheets, or even if we produce such sheets? How can we, I suppose, make them more interactive? I suppose is what we're trying to do when we're working with children. Make them more interactive, but also provide some element of information technology that improves or enriches the learning experience. Okay, and typically that might be, for example, in the case of the animal world, we might, for example, have a shell, and the shell has some kind of marker on it, and that triggers then opening of an app, and you see the shell suddenly burst into life, and you have the living creature. Okay. Now, in the sense of a plant, no matter what you do, the plant is a non-moving entity, and there's a certain degree of cognitive bias against plants for that reason, in that they're not animated, to use the term, and so we're still going to end up with static information, generally speaking. Though I've been kind of working with, building in sort of small GIFs or video clips and so on. But the simplest thing would be, for example, to improve the information would be to just link it with web pages, and that you immerse yourself into, if you like, the real-time version of the plant, as opposed to the dried, desiccated, dead version of the plant, which is what you get on the sheet. Okay, and of course, it isn't actually necessary to have the herbarium sheet if the endpoint, if you're looking towards the interactive experience as the point of the educational experience. Okay, so to work that the other way around, of course, is if you're looking at, say, photographs and maps and pictures and so on, and internet pages, you cannot get a sense of the real thing. Okay, now the example I've got here in the paper is known as Goldilocks in English. Okay, it's a peculiar kind of buttercup, and it often doesn't have its correct number of petals, which in a typical buttercup is 5. It might have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Okay, and sometimes no petals. It omits them altogether, and it's found on the edge of woodland and grassland, but neither in one or the other. It's found in low to medium altitudes, and it's found across Asia into Europe, more common in Britain and less common so in Ireland, where I'm based. Okay, so it's more of a rarity in Ireland. It does not produce sexually, even though it attracts bees. It produces asexually, apomictically, with its flowers. Okay, so it has flowers, but yet it's still asexual reproduction. So it's quite an unusual and an interesting little plant. It's not really a full perennial, though it can be described as such. It'll last for a few years, recede, and then have to be recolonized very often. Okay, so it has a lot of things that make it a something to deal with, something to work with in terms of teaching ecology to students at high school, for example. Now, for me, the fullest experience is to obviously go to the place where the plant is living, to have the herbarium specimens, in order to inspect, to study, and so on at your leisure, and then to have the further resources, the references in books, the maps online, the very other alternative photographs, to give me a different perspective, and so on, and also works that people have written about the plant from different parts of the world. Okay, now the thing is there's no one situation that's going to get me all of that. Okay, but when you have a herbarium sheet, and what I've done here is just I put a QR code on the herbarium sheet. The QR code brings me to a web page where a lot of things of that nature have been dumped in, such as other web pages and photographs and small snippets of text. and the students then can work out, well, where am I likely to find such a thing, and if the teacher can work some ecological field work, it is possible to capture, you know, go to a place where you can find such a thing, knowing now the time of the year, which is not what you typically get from websites and so on. The what I was doing here though with students, and these are students who are going to be primary teachers. They were presented with their impressions of these in AR enhanced herbarium sheet over those without, and of course being younger people, they thought anything that has an IT element to it is better, whatever that means, of course, However, the thing that was particularly interesting was then they were presented with a series of sheets that have an increasing level of complexity, or an increasing level of difficulty in being able to sort them into families. Okay, and what we did find is that when they were trying to do the sorting with we call it the AR enhanced sheets, okay, the sorting activity that was done more efficiently. Now, the thing about sorting is that it builds on an innate ability to categorize and classify. Now, that's an innate ability, but the thing is, of course, is that with all innate abilities, they have to be trained, they have to be developed and nurtured. Okay, so doing this is perhaps one way that we can actually nurture the innate ability to categorize and improve that fundamental human skill. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and I hope you find this poster interesting.